Good afternoon, and welcome to True Crime Mysteries. If you are new to the channel, hello and welcome, and if you are returning, welcome back. Today we are discussing one of the greatest takedowns of the FBI, when acting mob boss Al D'Arco flipped for the government, which ended an entire era of mob control of the city. Let's get into it. In the Mafia, there's your family, and then there's your family. The ones you take an oath to work for, kill for, and most importantly, never betray. For little Al D'Arco, his loyalty was to the Lucchese crime family, one of the 5 families of New York City. But eventually, he'd turn on his Mafia brothers and become the first NYC mob boss to become a government witness and the second highest Mafia defector in history. Here's how it all went down. Little Al D'Arco was born Alfonso D'Arco on July 28, 1932. He was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, into a large Italian family, to whom he was known as Sonny. The nickname was inspired by the song Sonny Boy by Al Jolson, which was on constant rotation in his family's home. Later, he would earn the nickname Little Al due to his modest height. Though his father wasn't involved in organized crime, D'Arco had connections to the city's underworld from birth. He was baptized by the same priest as Al Capone and had extended family members who were part of the Pittsburgh Mafia. He grew up watching the Navy Yard gang run the streets of his neighborhood and was constantly interacting with mobsters. He said it was like living in a forest, where a lot of the trees were organized crime men. He made his first foray into crime before he was a teenager, when he snuck into the furniture factory across the street from his family's home and stole a small amount of money. He waited until all the men had begun work and snuck into their locker room and took cash from their wallets. Someone from the neighborhood spotted him breaking in, and his dad confronted him about it when he got home, but he never owned up to the petty theft. Then at 13, D'Arco got caught fighting rival gang members and beating one of them with a billy club. He was arrested and beaten by cops before being released. Growing up, joining the Mafia wasn't D'Arco's main aspiration. After attending Catholic grammar school, he wanted to pursue his passion for planes, so he applied to the Manhattan High School of Aviation Trades. Unfortunately, he didn't get in because he was outside of the school zone. So, he dropped out of high school altogether and decided to see what local gang life had to offer. That's when he met a local candy shop proprietor named Dominic Cetera. Cetera would dispatch D'Arco and the other neighborhood teens to break into and steal from local factories, which D'Arco did. Then, to prove his worth to the local gangsters, he took a job from Pop, another neighborhood mob man and the owner of a local pool hall. Pop handed the young D'Arco a pair of brass knuckles and told him that when his friend Tommy stopped by, he was to punch him in the head as hard as he could. Tommy was D'Arco's friend, but according to Pop, Tommy needed to be taught a lesson. Pop had paid Tommy for a load of stolen goods, and Tommy had sold part of the load to someone else. When he saw Tommy, D'Arco did as he was instructed and punched him on the side of his head. Tommy fell to the ground, unconscious. This solidified D'Arco's loyalty to the mob, showing Pop and the other gangsters that he'd side with them over his own friend. D'Arco was never able to patch things up with Tommy after that. Later on, he said that punching Tommy was one of my biggest regrets to this day. D'Arco was then taken under the wing of a local up-and-coming gangster, Armando Bartolillo, for whom he'd rob and assault his targets. When Cetera, the candy shop owner, got caught with stolen goods and sent to prison, D'Arco took over the store, where he also hosted dice and card games and took sports bets in the back room. D'Arco manned the candy store for just over a year, until the monotony of the job became too much to bear. He'd been reading about the Korean War in the newspapers, which sounded much more exciting than standing behind a candy shop counter. So, on December 5th, 1951, he went to a recruiting office and joined the army. He wanted to go to Korea to fight, but instead, he was assigned to the Arctic Circle to guard the atom bomb. Still, army life wasn't enough to satiate him. He was a good soldier. He compared his military life to his mob life and drew many similarities. He was offered an opportunity to further his military career and go to officer training in Georgia, but it would take another 6 years to complete. At this point in his life, his grandmother, who he was incredibly close to, was getting older and likely didn't have many years left. So he gave up his military career and was honorably discharged. He headed back home to New York City, where he met his wife, Dolores. They met while on a double date with other people, but fell in love as soon as they laid eyes on each other. He got his friend to write her number on a piece of paper, which he kept in his wallet until the day he died. They married and had 5 kids together. Dolores, too, had ties to the Mafia. Her father, Joseph James Pellegrino, was a semi-retired mobster who was well respected by Little Italy's Mafia elders. Then, in the 1950s, everything changed for little Al D'Arco. He became an associate of the Vario crew, which is under the Lucchese crime family. The Vario crew was led by Paul Vario, who was a capo regime, otherwise known as a capo, and had major social status and influence in the organization. He quickly became involved in everything from loan sharking, shakedowns, murder, extortion, arson, and more. He was also involved in the occasional drug dealing, but it wasn't his thing. In the 1960s, D'Arco faced his first round of jail time after being convicted on drug-related charges. He spent a few years in prison, which he described as sort of mob boot camp. Being in prison gave him plenty of time to learn a lot of new skills from veteran mobsters already in prison, as well as ample time to peruse through various legal books. When he was released, he had special parole that had specific terms that he wasn't to be around convicted criminals, which dramatically reduced his social circle, and he needed to be especially careful with his work. When released, he returned home after 5 years. The Lucchese family had a new boss, Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo. D'Arco strived to become a made man in the Lucchese family, which would mean he was fully initiated into the Mafia. But there was a long wait, and not every member of the family was convinced that D'Arco was up to snuff. His cousin, a member of the Pittsburgh Mafia, offered to have him made there, but he refused, as he was a true New Yorker and wanted to remain so. Finally, on August 23, 1982, just after his 50th birthday, D'Arco received his button, as they say, and became a made man. In the 1980s, he also opened up an Italian restaurant in Manhattan called La Donna Rosa, where crime men and celebrities alike would meet and dine. D'Arco genuinely enjoyed running La Donna Rosa. He employed his youngest son as a cook. D'Arco had always been a hard worker and had run several legitimately successful business operations in addition to his mob career. Working hard was something he took from his father, and he also had 5 children and a wife to look after. In 1983, D'Arco was convicted of trafficking heroin and sentenced to 4 years in prison. This stung, as he felt he was genuinely innocent in the crime he was convicted for, not because he wasn't going to do the crime, but he hadn't yet done the crime. His second round in prison hadn't been the same as his first. He was older, and living conditions in prison weren't as easy to suffer through. He was paroled just 3 years later, in 1986, and again went back to the Lucchese family. In 1986, Victor Amuso took control of the Lucchese crime family, and 2 years later, he appointed Anthony Gaspipe Casso as the underboss. And when Paul Vario died in 1988, they promoted D'Arco as the Vario crew capo. He was becoming a very rich and powerful man, and his list of crimes continued to grow. In 1989, D'Arco was called to help settle a dispute between his bosses and a longtime Lucchese capo, Michael Papadillo. Papadillo helped manage the family's dealings in the garment district and was suspected of holding back earnings. D'Arco tried to convince Papadillo to leave the garment racket to their bosses, but he wouldn't listen. Amuso and Casso wanted him gone and started to suspect that he would soon become a police informant. This started a growing paranoia amongst all the mob families. The FBI had started closing in, hell-bent on taking the mobs down, and guys were flipping to the government all the time. If there was even the slightest whisper that a guy had flipped, it was a death sentence. So, they ordered D'Arco to kill Papadio. D'Arco said that he and an associate hid in the office of a Brooklyn bagel shop called the Crown Bagel, waiting for Papadio with 2 pistols, a metal pipe, and a body bag. When Papadio stepped into the office, they yelled, "Surprise!" and D'Arco hit him with the metal pipe. They then shot him with a .22 caliber pistol, but the first bullet bounced off his head and wedged in the door, so they took out a bigger gun and shot him dead. It had been a messy murder, one that had stuck with D'Arco. He convinced himself that it was Papadio's fault. He had signed his own death warrant when he had failed to follow protocol. The mob used to have a strict code of conduct: no killing innocents like women and children, no drugs, don't be flashy, report all your earnings, and the most important was to follow orders without question. But as years went on, many of those rules went to the wayside. Drugs was a lucrative business. Profits from heroin topped any other opportunity. With money came a flash: big houses, big cars, flashing cash around, which brought more attention. And with attention brought newspapers, the government, and law enforcement. In 1990, Amuso chose D'Arco to organize a committee of Lucchese family members to oversee the unions and construction companies they controlled, and to organize business ventures between them and the other 5 families of New York, also known as La Cosa Nostra. In 1990, he facilitated the murder of a Lucchese mobster named Bruno Facchiola, who his bosses suspected was an informant. He was stabbed, shot, and left with a canary in his mouth, which was a sign that the deceased was an informant, as they were singing to the police. In 1991, Lucchese bosses Amuso and Casso received a warning about an upcoming federal indictment and went into hiding, leaving D'Arco as the acting mob boss. D'Arco would meet with them in safe houses, but over time, D'Arco and others noticed their boss's paranoia and ruthlessness towards their own crew members was growing at an uncontrollable pace. This led to a breakdown in loyalty and unity in the Lucchese family, as many mobsters felt the bosses were ordering murders just to make themselves feel secure and powerful. That same year, Amuso became convinced that one of the Lucchese capos, Peter "Fat Pete" Chiodo, had flipped and became a government witness. Amuso thought Chiodo had ordered D'Arco to kill him, so he ordered Chiodo to be killed instead. In May, Chiodo was shot 12 times, but survived due to his girth. He was a big man, and luckily, his fat kept the bullets from hitting his major arteries. Chiodo survived and then defected from the Mafia and became a government witness, testifying against the family in a later trial. Amuso and Casso's paranoid demands kept piling up. After the Jersey crew, a New Jersey faction of the Lucchese family, refused to increase the family share of profits, Amuso and Casso ordered D'Arco to kill them all. There were 49 people on their hit list, many of whom were Lucchese associates. Amuso also ordered D'Arco to bring in a bomb expert to blow up John Gotti, the Gambino family mob boss. These actions convinced D'Arco and others that their bosses weren't acting rationally. After the failed murder attempt on Chiodo, Amuso and Casso demoted D'Arco from the acting boss and replaced him with a 4-panel group of capos. D'Arco knew they didn't trust him anymore and started to think they were waiting to kill him. D'Arco had problems with how they were running things, too. Before, there was a sort of code that the family members of their targets were off limits, and D'Arco was shocked and disturbed when he heard mob bosses talking about killing or hurting their targets' wives, kids, and other relatives. Then the rumors started. Word on the street was that Al was no good, and even his longtime associates and good friends were keeping their distance. He had been labeled an informant and rat, which wasn't true, yet, and they were out to get him. At one point, he was stopped in the street by an FBI agent who loudly thanked him for his help in an effort to make it look like he flipped and get him killed. His fears were confirmed on September 18, 1991. He was in a room at Manhattan's Kimberly Hotel for a meeting with other Lucchese family leaders to discuss their rackets and upcoming shakedowns. During the meeting, One of the acting bosses of another mob family said the only way to end the threat of mob cooperators was to kill their entire families. Then he noticed that Mike DeSantis, a crew soldier, had a gun hidden on him. When DeSantis went to the bathroom and came back, the gun was gone. D'Arco knew this meant whoever went into the bathroom next would come out shooting, and that he was the target. He made an excuse to leave and never looked back. After that day at the Kimberly Hotel, D'Arco sent most of his family, aside from him and his son Joe, to Hawaii for their safety. He called Joe, who was also a made member of the Lucchese family, and told him they had to do something before the Mafia killed them and their family. He called a lawyer he'd worked with previously, and that lawyer reached out to someone in the FBI who might be able to help, an agent named Rob Marston. Agent Marston knew of D'Arco, whose name had come up during his investigation into illegal dumping in the Delaware River. In wiretaps, they'd heard dump operators voice concern over D'Arco, but they had no recordings of him or proof of him attending any related meetings. Over the phone, D'Arco told Marston that people wanted him dead and that he wanted to retaliate. He wondered what Marston could do for him if he went with him. After earning D'Arco's trust, Marston sent his team to collect D'Arco and his son Joe from his mother's house on Long Island and drove them up to the New Rochelle FBI office. At the time, D'Arco didn't have any criminal cases pending against him, nor did the FBI consider him as a potential informant. In fact, he was hardly on the FBI's radar at all. This is likely because D'Arco lived a low-key lifestyle that went against that of many mobsters. He never flaunted his money with cars or jewelry, but simply went about business and got things done. He rarely drank, gave up what little gambling he'd done in the past, and was always faithful to his wife of 50 years. Once D'Arco had made the decision to turn, he made it his mission to work tirelessly for the government. He simply traded one boss for another, and as always, was a good soldier. His main motivation was to protect his family. Once entire families were being targeted, he was out. He said on the stand that naming a man as a rat when he wasn't a rat was the greatest offense one could make. He said it straight to Vic Amuso's face during his trial. D'Arco was put into the witness protection program and, according to government sources, didn't commit any further criminal acts. During their conversations, D'Arco gave the FBI information on the Lucchese family's involvement with union corruption, government contracts, as well as their racketeering in the garment district. 2 NYPD officers were convicted for murder when it was discovered they had been on the mob payroll. These officers tipped off the Lucchese bosses of upcoming arrests, investigations, and informants, and even fulfilled hits for the bosses. Investigators say D'Arco had a great memory and referred to him as the Mafia Rain Man. He knew comprehensive histories of crime families dating back to the turn of the century, as well as the small details, like which crime families had the rights to sell bread to what vendors at the San Gennaro Festival on Mulberry Street in Little Italy. He also provided answers to a few unsolved murders, some of which had been long abandoned by the police. Mob investigators say he was a walking crime encyclopedia. At the time, D'Arco was the highest-ranking member of a New York crime family to testify against the mob. Over the next 10 years, he would testify in dozens of trials, as well as grand jury hearings, which helped convict over 50 mobsters. This includes his boss, Amuso, who was convicted in 1992 after D'Arco took the stand against him. Amuso remains the official boss of the Lucchese family, even from prison, where he's serving a life sentence for murder and racketeering. Casso, the Lucchese family underboss at the time, was captured in 1993, became an informant, and was placed in witness protection in 1994, but had his status rescinded after he was caught in one too many lies. He was sentenced to 455 years in prison for racketeering, extortion, and murder. He died from COVID-19 related complications in 2020. D'Arco also helped put away the acting boss of the Colombo crime family, Victor Little Vic Orena, Bonanno crime family consigliere Anthony Sparrow, and 2 members of the Genovese family, consigliere James Ida and boss Vincent Chin Gigante. Many defendants accepted plea deals rather than have their case go to trial, where the jury would hear what D'Arco had on them. D'Arco's defection led to many more Mafia informants coming forward. Former FBI supervisor Michael Campy said, "Al D'Arco was the most significant made member to cooperate. He really built that bridge for others to cross." In 2002, D'Arco faced his own charges and was sentenced to time served, fined $50, and returned to witness protection. He confessed to his role in a dozen killings and to the unfulfilled murder plots of many others. He expressed some regret over the murders, only because the allegations against the victims, mostly that they were informants, were likely untrue. In March 2005, 73-year-old D'Arco testified against Steven Caracappa and Luis Ippolito, two former NYPD detectives who were charged with taking $4,000 a month from Caso to work as hitmen and insider informants for the Lucchese family. In 2013, journalists Jerry Capacey and Tom Robbins released the book Mob Boss: The Life of Little Al D'Arco, the man who brought down the Mafia. They met with D'Arco twice while he was under witness protection to get his story.
I mean, you come away with the feeling that you like this guy, despite his heinous acts and his, amorality or immorality. You like him. Why do you like him?
The hard guy not to like, Doug. You met him, you'd like him too, I guarantee it.
And what is it about him, besides his wit and as a source, this unbelievable memory? What is it about the guy?
He is not taken with himself. He does not have like an enormous ego that he flaunts. He doesn't try to rub your face and what a big deal he was. He is a guy. He loved the mob, I think, because he saw it as his vocation. Mm-hmm. He saw it as a business, as he called it.
Yep.
And he wanted to work hard, and he did work hard.
And he was extraordinarily successful.
He did very well at it.
In March of 2019, 86-year-old Al D'Arco died from complications related to kidney disease. During his time in the mob, he had partaken in numerous crimes, but without his testimony, numerous cold cases would have remained unsolved, and the Mafia, which had a tight grip over the city of New York, may still have existed. I wonder what kind of life D'Arco would have led if he had been accepted into the pilot academy that he had so desperately wanted as a kid. Well, that is it for this video. Please let me know if you want me to cover more mob cases, as I found this super interesting to research. As always, please give this video a thumbs up if you like the content, and subscribe for more if you haven't already. Also, don't forget to turn on that notification bell so you get notified when I post. If you've done all that and want to support me and the channel, we have channel membership and Patreon to get early access, members-only content, live streams, and more. We also have merch and other goodies in the description box and links to all my socials. But until then, I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.